Okay, students, we're going to keep continuing on with our introduction to forensic science, and the next with this screencast, and then the activity I'm going to have you guys do a little interactive crime scene game from the internet. Looking at crime scenes, what is a crime scene? How to process a crime scene, and typically what we would do if we were in the classroom is I would go up to the library and set up a mock crime. I've got this big piece of paper that you can roll out. It's got a body on it, and I put some blood on it, and some fake blood, and some fingerprints, and so we would sketch all of this stuff because that's important. You know, when you get to a crime, you weren't at the crime. Your job is to take all the pieces of evidence and then work backwards to how that crime was committed. So, just looking at some of the basics here, you know, the word crime is derived from the Latin root cerno, meaning I decide, I give judgment. So not a great definition. This comes more from the criminal's perspective there of giving judgment. Crime is a breach of rules or laws for which some governing authority can ultimately prescribe a conviction. Okay, so it's a set of rules, set of laws. It's our criminal justice system where people preside and can basically hand out convictions and hand out sentencings for crimes that have been committed. All right, so looking at just basics of crimes here. So the crime scene investigation here, you see a picture of Sarah Seidel from the hit TV show CSI Las Vegas. But again, based on the scientific method, and you guys are well versed in the scientific method, going from observations to asking questions, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, and conclusions. And we talked about this the other day, Locard's exchange principle. Okay, the idea that anytime you have contact between two objects, and it could be the air and an object, you're going to have an exchange of material. And trying to find that exchange is the key part here. Basic logic, you know, we did some deductive reasoning the other day, and forensic science techniques. Okay, all of these things, the scientific method, the idea that things exchange material, deductive reasoning and working backwards, and then basic forensic science techniques, and taking the proper way to take certain types of fingerprints, the proper way to collect hair and fibers, using the Beck, looking for Beck lines when you're looking at glass and things like that. Okay, you're looking at recognition, the scene survey, documenting everything, collection of crime scene evidence. Identification, if you've got items that can be compared back to a database, like shell casings or a slug, types of glass, chips of paint, you can do some comparison testing for identification. Evaluating and interpreting individualized evidence, and that's the key part here. Is there's two basic types of evidence. There is individual evidence, which is very, very specific. That basically pinpoints a suspect to a T. And then you've got class evidence, which is going to narrow down your suspects to a smaller pool, but not one individual person, okay? So an individual piece of DNA would be an individual characteristic, whereas a paint sample or a chip of paint on a car would narrow down your list of cars to cars that have that color paint, okay? But it doesn't mean it's exactly that single car. And then reconstruction, reporting and presenting. This is that court of law that we talked about. You're going to have to be expert witnesses in a court of law. Okay, so recognizing, identifying, individualizing, trying to pinpoint evidence to a specific suspect, and then reconstructing and reporting it back to the jury. So what are we trying to do in crime scene investigation? What happened? Where did it happen? And you might not be at the primary crime scene. When did it happen? When was the time of death? Why did it happen? Who may have perpetrated these actions? Okay, and there's another one down there that I'm being blocked out on. But who, what, what, where, when, why, and how? Okay, how was the incident carried out? Those are the six basic types of questions, and we're just applying that to the crime scene investigation. Types of crime scenes is important here. The indoor crime scene, evidence at an indoor crime scene is generally less susceptible to loss. It's protected just by the nature of it being indoors. It's not going to be as contaminated, and it's not going to change over time. It's not going to be affected by the outdoor the weather patterns or the outdoor erosion of of Mother Nature. So it is protected to some degree. Now, there's going to be some deterioration over time, but it's less susceptible to those kinds of things. Indoor crime scenes are usually easier to secure and protect, and securing a scene can be as simple as closing a door. Okay, police officer gets to a murder scene. He pokes his head in the door. He sees a body there. He knows the scene is secure. Simply close the door off, stand right next to it, and make sure nobody gets in there. Okay, that's as simple as securing a crime scene. Let the investigators and let the technicians get there to process that crime scene. Now, the outdoor crime scene is much messier. Okay, most vulnerable to loss, contamination, and deleterious change of physical evidence in a very short period of time. Let's say a crime is committed at 6 p.m., there's a murder weapon, it's left at the scene, and then all of a sudden at 6:20 it starts to rain. Okay, so a lot of that evidence is going to be washed away by the crime scene by the fact that it's raining outdoors. If you have a crime and a body isn't found for several months or several years, obviously you've got lots of weathering and lots of things happening around them, wildlife and things like that affect the crime scene. Individuals with access to the scene can potentially alter, destroy, or contaminate evidence at an outdoor crime scene. The crime scene can be very large, and people walking through there can inadvertently damage all of that evidence. Okay, so obviously you don't have any control over this, but processing an indoor scene is much, much easier than processing an outdoor crime scene. What you're looking for is direct evidence. This is part of that individual evidence, okay, that if true, proves an alleged fact. Okay, you want that evidence to be as pinpoint and as specific as possible. First-hand observations such as eyewitness accounts. Confessions are also direct evidence. Also, police dash videos, anything caught on camera is going to be direct evidence. All you have to do to get a good example of what direct evidence is look what's happening on CNN and all the news outlets. Every single crime that's committed at a protest, at a riot, with a police car being, pulling somebody over, somebody's got a camera on it. It's almost impossible not to have any direct evidence. When we get back into the school, okay, just look up, because there's a camera somewhere in almost every nook and cranny of our building looking for that direct evidence, okay? And it's almost going to be impossible that if you can prove that direct evidence, that it's going to be thrown out in a court of law, all right? What's harder is the circumstantial evidence, okay? It's indirect evidence that can be used to imply a fact, but that does not directly prove it, okay? It simply provides a link between the crime scene and the suspect. It can be either physical or biological. It really doesn't matter. So putting someone in the general area of a crime would be circumstantial evidence. A lot of TV shows that you watch, they use cell tower pings. A crime is committed in a rural area, and one of the pieces of evidence is the fact that the suspect's cell phone was pinged within 10 miles of the crime scene. It doesn't put him at the crime scene. It puts him within 10 miles of the crime scene. A crime is committed at a place of business and the fingerprint of a possible suspect is located there. Well, that suspect might work there. And if they do, their fingerprints are going to be everywhere. Okay. So that would be a bit of circumstantial evidence. In the O.J. Simpson trial, we'll talk about this quite a bit. There was a huge amount of circumstantial evidence. Okay. But there wasn't that one piece of direct evidence that tied him to the crime scene. And that's one of the big reasons why he got acquitted. Hi, Baron. I'm just talking to my son over here. Okay. Some of those physical evidence that we talked about, whether that's direct evidence or circumstantial, includes impressions like fingerprints. Okay. We'll talk more about them. Footprints, whether they're bare footprints or with shoe prints, tire impressions, tool marks, hair and fibers, bullets, weapons, ballistics, cartridge cases. All of these at some point are going to fall under that low cards principle of exchange, where suspect left behind a piece of information. It's your job to find it, recognize it, process it, and then analyze it, and then tell about it later. Okay. Tool marks is very interesting because anything can be used as a murder weapon. Your cell phone, if you beat someone to death with it, can be used as a murder weapon, and it's going to leave a very unique impression. Okay. A claw hammer leaves an impression that's different than a crowbar. The shell casing of a 9mm handgun is going to have a different impression on it than the shell casing of a Glock 40 handgun. All right. They're all different. Biological evidence, body fluids, hair, plant parts, natural fibers, anything DNA related is going to be biological evidence. We could go on and on about things in nature found at a crime scene. If it's from Mother Nature, it's probably going to have some sort of biological evidence tied to it. And you could probably make the argument that fingerprints could be biological evidence. Fibers could be biological, maybe. It depends on where it comes from. But anything made by Mother Nature can be used as biological evidence. Here's the hard part. When you think about some crimes and when they're committed, securing the scene is very, very difficult. We keep talking about the riot that's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin right now, the shooting of Jacob Blake, and then the subsequent shooting from the young teenager from Illinois that went to Wisconsin with an AR, and it was trying to protect property, but it eventually got into a whole lot of trouble up there, and it's going to be a long time for that to get sorted out. But imagine being a police officer trying to secure the scene of a double homicide with another person injured in the middle of a riot. All of that evidence is being compromised with every single step of that riot. And then you've got all the people who are upset that are already out there protesting. And then this thing happens with the shooting, and now they're even more agitated, they're more upset. They're already agitated with the police as it is. Imagine being in that scenario, trying to secure a crime scene, surrounded by that kind of energy. All right. Separating witnesses. There's 4 or 5 different videos of that crime, of the shootings. So separating the witnesses, trying to get their statements as factual as possible. You never want to interview people that are standing right next to each other, giving conflicting stories. You want to separate everybody, get individual statements, and then try to piece it all from there. Scanning the scene, seeing the scene. At some point, somebody's going to come in and sketch the crime scene to give a better feel for the numbers and the spacing and the angles that are used with some of this physical evidence. Searching for evidence, securing and collecting evidence. From the time a crime is committed to this time it is secured and collecting evidence, you're talking it could be hours for that to happen. Crime scene tape is left up for hours and hours and hours because you have to secure the scene, which was going to take, probably wouldn't take very long, but then you've got to start separating witnesses and taking statements. Scan the scene for just getting that initial feel, that initial walkthrough to get a feel for what you think might have happened. Sketching the scene, getting those numbers, getting everything, and taking photographs and writing descriptions on how evidence was located. Searching for the evidence, trying to find all those physical pieces and all that kind of stuff, and then securing and collecting evidence. Okay, very, very arduous, but it has to be a very time-consuming process to do it properly. When we go back here to securing and collecting evidence. Okay, evidence can be massive to a microscope. All right, if you can get a piece of evidence back to the lab, okay, the technology at the crime lab is going to do wonders. It's going to, you put under a comparison microscope, and now you've got 2 pieces of evidence to look at. You put it into a mass spectrophotometry. You're going to scan it for DNA. You take these little pieces of evidence back to the lab securely and properly. Your case could break wide open, and that circumstantial evidence that you collected at the crime scene can become direct evidence by using the technology that's there. Okay. How do you get it there? By any means necessary. Sometimes you got to cut clothing off of a victim. Okay. Take the entire pair of pants off a victim to the lab. Take a full tire off of a car to get it back to the lab. You're not taking individual small pieces. You want the whole thing as a piece of evidence. Fingernail scrapings, vacuum sweepings, taking a lint roller and just going over certain areas, using different techniques to take a fingerprint off. So many different ways to do this, but if you can do it properly and get it back to the lab, okay, and that's the key part here, get it back to the lab, that lab is going to work wonders for all those little pieces of evidence. All evidence needs to be properly packaged, sealed, and labeled. There are probably thousands, if not millions, of court cases that have been thrown out or lost in court because the evidence was not properly packaged, not properly sealed, and not properly labeled. Okay, there has to be a chain of command that shows how the evidence was collected, who it was handed off to, step by step by step. And if there's not, a defense attorney is going to basically get that evidence thrown out. They're going to say it was contaminated, it was handled by the wrong person at the wrong time, who may or may not have manipulated the evidence, and now you can't use it. Okay, so we have to have a case number on that evidence, an item inventory number, description, name of the suspect, name of the victim, date and time of recovery, signature of a person, and then I think you want to make sure that all the edges are sealed, and the signature of any witness. That's a lot of information even for the slightest piece of evidence, but that slight piece of evidence might be the direct evidence you need to get a conviction. Okay. So obviously we'd spend a couple days on this. We're going to watch the screencast. I'm going to give you a little interactive game that you'll work through. We're going to come back tomorrow and do what I call Jane's restaurant activity, looking at how well you can observe crime scenes and kind of pick up the small details of a crime scene and see what we come up with. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow.